is a chapter book about a dog named Spunky. It was a favorite amongst my 6th grade students and my 2nd grade students. So join us for a great story. I'll read 2 or 3 chapters at a time, and you'll need to check the next video to find out what happens. So enjoy. Here we go. Spunky by Dori Brink. Prologue. You are asleep now and don't even know I'm here watching you. The house is still and everyone else is asleep too. I will see that no harm comes to you. If anything happens, I will bark loud and even bite. I've learned a lot in the past year since I was a pup. As soon as you are able to stretch your legs, we will run through the fields and play together. There's so much I can show you, and so many things we can do. Strange how much I love you. Up until now, I didn't know how love could feel. Maybe if I tell you about myself, you will understand. Chapter 1. I lay there shivering in the wet grass. I ate some of it, then threw up. The knots in my stomach unwound, and I crept back inside the paper bag. It crinkled loudly as I crawled far back to the rounded corners and curled myself into a ball. It was all the protection I had from the night. A bird screeched by above me, and in the distance a wild howling rose into the air. I longed for my mother's warm body and tender lapping. I could still taste the sweetness of her milk and feel the rhythmic rippling of her contented sighs when I pressed against her. Where was my mother? I wanted her. In the morning, when the sun came up, I would look for her. The thought of finding her again comforted me and helped me fall asleep. Suddenly, a sharp clawing noise at the opening of the bag shocked me awake. Huge, shiny eyes were peering straight at me, and rasping breath filled the bag with foul air. I yelped and thrashed about in my corner until the eyes and mouth withdrew. I dared not sleep again. I listened carefully to the sounds of the night, hoping they would not come closer. My eyelids drooped, and in my mind, I now again saw that large hand slowly reaching toward me as I pressed farther back into my mother's softness. I tried to snap at the hand, but it grasped the back of my neck and lifted me up. It dropped me into the bag and carried me out of the house my mother and I had lived in. At first, there were other pups in the house besides myself, but they had been given away, one by one, to the grown-ups and children who came to look at us. Every time one of them tried to touch me, I snapped at them as hard as I could. "Mean pup, nasty little pup," they would say, and turn their attention to the others. Then I would settle back under the soft curve of my mother's neck. Soon all the other pups were gone, and I had my mother all to myself. The hand snapped a rubber band around the top of the bag, and there was no way for me to get out. But there was a small opening near the top, letting air through to me. A car door clicked open, and I felt a hard seat beneath me. The motor started, and I could feel its vibration through the seat. The ride was terrifying and long. At last, the car came to a halt. I could sense the great distance that now separated me from my mother. The bag was lifted up, and the rubber band snapped off. Then, the bag and I sailed into the air. I felt a dizzy moment of space, then I thumped to the ground. The car roared away, and I listened to the sound fade until all I could hear were the crickets in the grass around me. Through the opening of the bag, I could smell the pungent night air. I looked out into the darkness. Would morning never come? Would it ever come? I could hear my heart beating. The sound blended with the strange rustlings and croakings of the night. Somehow, I dozed again. When I opened my eyes, the sun was there. I crawled out of the bag and stretched my legs. It felt good. I was warm. The field seemed friendly now and full of light. I could not wait to find my mother. I sniffed about anxiously. but there was no trace of her anywhere. My stomach was in knots again, and I gulped back thick saliva. The thought of her warm milk made the saliva flow more freely down my throat. Which way should I go? Tall, thick weeds and tangled bushes blocked my view. A string of birds flew by above me, and I lifted my head to watch them. They were heading toward the mountains that jutted into the sky at the far stretches of the field. A familiar sound caught my ear, and I cocked my head to one side to listen. It was a very faint sound, but I'd heard it before. Laughter. Children's laughter. Now there was something to guide me. I headed toward the sound. Chapter 2. I could see the children now. They were running about, doing all kinds of things. Some were scrambling after a ball and tossing it into the air when they caught it. Some were sitting on wooden planks, pushing themselves up and down. Others were climbing metal bars, twisting themselves in and out of the openings. Behind them was a tall brick building surrounded by carpeted grass and smooth pathways. The neatness contrasted sharply with the ragged fields I had been running through. One of the children caught my eye and held my attention. He was chewing something. I gulped with anticipation. There was food here. I headed toward him and saw him take a bite from something wrapped in paper. Then a bell clanged, and he began to walk toward the building. I trailed behind the boy, watching him take another bite, then crumple the paper and throw it away. I went after the paper. With my nose, I managed to uncrumple it a bit. There was a lick of something sweet inside, a trace of chocolate, a sweet, so tantalizing, delicious, it made me even hungrier than before. And I was thirsty. The children were all inside the building now. I moved along the smooth pavement, searching for something to eat or drink. A small blob of chewed gum caught my eye. I peeled it from the pavement with my teeth and chewed it in back of my mouth. It did not dissolve, and after a while I just gulped it down my throat. Half a peanut was my next find. That was good. A lollipop covered with ants was my next treat. Now I was more thirsty than hungry. The pavement around the school building led into a wide street with rows of houses on either side. The rich aroma of sizzling food came through the open windows. Saliva filled my mouth and hunger gripped my insides. A thin stream of water crossed the pavement. It was coming from a long hose nestled in the grass in front of a house. I licked the stream gratefully, then followed it to the side of the house, where the hose was attached. The water oozed in spurts, and I drank my fill. I felt much better. I could find things to eat and drink. But I had to find much more to fill my stomach. Much more. I continued along the pavement, keeping my nose close to the ground, sniffing for food. A flutter of wings caught my eye. Birds were settling down near a house I was approaching. They were gathered on the lawn, pecking away at something. I drew closer. Chunks of bread! Crisp bread! I galloped through the cluster of birds, and they rose into the air. I snatched the pieces of bread into my mouth as fast as I could. Heavy footsteps pounded down the pavement at the side of the house, and a huge woman lurched toward me, swinging a broom back and forth. "Get away from here, you muddy pup!" she shouted. Mounds of fat shivered along her arm as she waved the broom. I trotted past her to the back of the house, glancing around every few steps. The woman was taking more bread out of her pocket and breaking it into small pieces, letting them drop to the grass. The birds were already back to pick them up. When I rounded the corner of the house, I almost bumped into a tall garbage can. Crouched on top of the can was a cat, daintily chewing away at a mound of food. I yelped at this incredible sight. Instantly, the cat hunched her back and leaped off the can, tipping it over as she jumped. I drew a quick breath as the wonders of the can were spread out on the ground before me. Peas and carrots wetted with tomato ketchup, squash peaches, lumps of potatoes topped with waxy fat and paper towels, eggshells with traces of yolk still inside the broken pieces. Half hidden by potato peels and coffee grounds was a big, juicy bone with fatty meat clinging to it. I had it between my teeth just as that huge woman loomed over me again. I jumped aside, and the broom whooshed past me. "Get out of here!" the woman screamed, and came after me again. This time, the broom landed on my backside, pricking my skin. I growled at her as best I could with the bone between my teeth. She kept swinging that broom at me while I moved away, but the bone was secure in my mouth. Why would she deny me this feast? A short distance away, I paused to look back. The woman was shoveling that wonderful food back into the can. Then she pressed a lid tightly over it. With rolling satisfaction, she pumped herself down the pathway and into the house. I sank down on the grass with my bone. First, I ate the meat. Then I scraped and chewed all the tasty gristle clinging to the surface. Finally, I nicked and gnawed away at the core until all the juices and gritty marrow were gone. When the bone was completely dry, I rested my chin over it with deep affection. What a wonderful treat! There must be more treasures like this to be found. I would have to be careful of people, though. They could hurt you so easily. Chapter 3. I wandered up and down the rows of houses, checking the garbage cans behind each one. Almost all of them had lids on them, but scraps of food could usually be found nearby if I sniffed around long enough. Abruptly, the streets ended and the wild fields began again. I was back where I had started. I could see the towering mountains in the distance. A huge truck was rolling through the fields, pushing bushes and tangled grass out of its path. It left flat, smooth tracks of earth behind its wheels. The sight fascinated me for a while, but the smell of food coming from the houses made me turn back. The sun was going down, and darkness was settling over the streets. Lights flickered on inside the houses, throwing bushes and pavement into sharp angles and jagged edges. I needed a place to sleep. I heard the distant howling of animals prowling the fields, and I shuddered at the sounds, remembering my fearful sleep the night before. In back of one of the houses, a garage door was partly open. The smells made me sneeze, but a large round tire lying in one corner looked inviting. I jumped into its hollow middle and curled myself into a ball. I felt snug and warm. The howling of strange animals would not bother me here. I licked my whiskers for traces of meat inside. If only my mother were here to cuddle up against. My mother. It was the first time since morning that I had thought of her. With the taste of meat still clinging to my whiskers, the memory of her sweet milk was fading away. Each day I searched for food and got better and better at finding it. Constant hunger sharpened my alertness. Within a week, I knew exactly where to go and at what time of day. I discovered that children liked me, and children often had something sweet to eat in their hands. At the brick school building, when the sun was setting straight up in the sky, they all came outside to play. Each day at that time, I was there waiting for them. I watched for children holding a piece of candy or cake and wagged my way over to them. While they fussed over me and stroked my shaggy hair with sticky fingers, I made the grab. Shrill cries followed me when I ran off with the sweet treasure, but the children always welcomed me back again the next day. When the sun went down, I went from house to house, sniffing around the garbage cans. People usually loaded them after their evening meal, and I could find delicious scraps of food that had landed on the ground. I wished I could get inside those cans, and I kept an eye out for my mother, another cat, to tip one over for me. Once I did find another cat perched on top of a can, but when I barked as loud as I could to frighten it into action, the cat only hissed and spat at me. Hardest to bear were the dusty, indifferent men who came down the streets regularly to take the cans away. A huge truck with an enormous appetite followed them everywhere. I ran after the men, yapping at their heels, begging them not to take the cans, but they paid no attention to me. One by one, they carried the cans to the truck and emptied them into its huge, ever-chomping mouth. One night, I slept under the back stairs of a house because the doors of my garage were shut. In the morning, mingling with the sun-baked wood of the stairs and the fresh paint of the house, came the smell of eggs frying and bacon sizzling. I traced the agonizing whiffs to a nearby window and sat there, shifting with longing. Suddenly, the door at the top of the stairs swung open and a woman came out holding a bowl in her hands. She shielded her eyes from the sun and called, "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty." Finally, with an impatient shrug, she put the bowl down and went back inside the house. The moment the door closed, a cat crept out of the bushes near the house. After making sure I hadn't moved, it quickly ran up the stairs to the bowl. It was lapping milk into its mouth, squeezing its eyes with pleasure. I moved slowly, and when I was right under the stairs, I barked. The cat jumped off the landing and darted away. The next moment, I was drinking milk. Cool, sweet, delicious milk. I was under those stairs the following morning, waiting to see if another miracle would happen. It did. As soon as the woman went back inside, I was at the bowl, lapping away with pleasure. The cat kept her distance, although I could hear her cry not too far away. As my self-reliance grew, my spirit soared. After a particularly good find, I would feel playful and run about in zigzags to express my joy. Sometimes I rolled in the grass in ecstasy with the bright sun smiling down at me. One afternoon, I saw a dog bounding out of one of the houses in fitful strides. Attached to his neck was a long, thin leash held tightly by the man behind him. I could see the dog wanted to run, but the man held him back. I ran up to the dog and sniffed his nose. The man pulled the leash up sharply, yanking the dog away from me. But the dog pulled and thrashed toward me until his eyes bulged with frustration. I could not help showing off my freedom. I ran about in circles in front of him, then darted up and across his lawn and down his very own steps. Giddy with joy, I ran across the street, then dashed back again to the dog. I smiled up into his tortured face. The man finally dragged the dog away from me. I watched them go with great pity. How sad to be tied like that to a man. I had no way of knowing during this time that rain would come and ruin all my sources of food and shelter. I had never known rain before. The first drops were like pellets hitting me, and I looked up to the sky in surprise. Huge, dark clouds were moving menacingly above me. Thunder cracked in my ears and flashes of light scorched my eyes. Children ran through the streets, shrieking happily when they reached their houses. For a moment, I didn't know where to go. Then I remembered. I ran for the garage. The door was open, but rain splashed through the roof, making puddles of water everywhere. Even the rubber tire was damp and cold. I shivered and wondered how long I would have to bear it. The rain was to last for days. The mornings were gray. No bowl of milk was left outside. I watched the cat being let into the warmly lit house. The scraps around the garbage cans were soggy and tasteless, and the school children did not play outside. One evening, I sat under an awning at the back of one of those houses. The rain streamed down just a few inches in front of my nose, and soft light shone through the glass door. I looked inside. People were passing platters of steaming meat and vegetables to each other around a table. I saw a familiar head bob up alongside the table. It was the dog I had seen on the leash a few days ago. He was sitting beside the man who had yanked him away from me. The dog touched the man's arm with his paw, and the man turned and tossed him a piece of meat. The dog caught it expertly, gobbling it down with keen pleasure. I gulped in anguish. Another delicious sliver of meat was thrown and caught. Now the man swirled a piece of bread into a bowl of gravy, and the dog licked it out of his hand. It was too much for me. I plodded back to the garage through the soggy grass, stunned by what I had seen. Inside my cold tire, I thought about that dog. Just a few days ago, I had pitied him. Now, more than anything else, I wanted to be inside a warmly lit house, being fed wonderful things to eat. But only people lived in houses. I would have to find someone to live with. Until now, I had avoided people, aware of the pain they could cause. I sighed deeply, wishing the rain would stop. And that's where I will stop for now. Tune in next time for Chapter 4.